Hello and welcome. Hi, I'm Dave. This tutorial is part of a Node.js and Express for Beginners tutorial series. I'll put a link to the full playlist in the description below. Today we will add user authorization to our Express API. We're going to start with the code repository from the last tutorial, but if you don't have it, you should be able to easily follow along without it, or you can download or clone the starter source code from the link that I've provided in the description below. We're going to get started by simulating a user's database table in our model directory with the user's JSON file. So let's open the model directory and let's create a new file and name it users.json. And now we really don't need to put anything in here, but I'll go ahead and just put in an empty array as if it would hold JSON, but it's not right now because we're going to write over this really. Now, user authorization requires two routes: a registration route to register a new user account and an authorization route to authorize the user after they have created an account. But we're going to start in the controllers folder because that's where we'll really handle the routes and what we do with them. So let's go ahead and create a new controller and let's call this register controller.js. Okay, in the register controller, let's start out by pulling in our users from the users database that we're simulating with that JSON file. I'm going to create an object and set this up much like you would see with useState in React, where we have our users state, and we'll go ahead and require those users, and this will be /model/users.json. And after we do that, let's go ahead and have a setUsers method for this object as well. And here we can say function, pass in the data, and now, oops, I'm so used to writing an arrow function, but this will not have an arrow. And it's users equals data. There we go. And now that we've got our setUsers function and then our users pulled in, so we'll have our users database object that contains both of these. Just a quick way to simulate that. So if you're used to working with React, this should look kind of familiar, even though it's not really the use state. And if you're not, I hope you're familiar enough with JavaScript to understand how this will be the users. And of course, we'll set the users using our setter function right here. Okay, now we need some other things because we're going to work with that JSON file. So let's go ahead and pull in fs promises, and that's the file system, so we require fs, but then after it we put .promises, and then we're also going to need path, so let's require path. Well, there we go. If I can type path, we'll get it. And now we're going to need to install a package called bcrypt, and bcrypt will help us hash and salt the passwords that we come in so we can securely and safely store them in our database. So let's go ahead and open a terminal window. I press Control backtick here in Windows to open my terminal window. You could also go to the terminal menu and choose New Terminal. But here we're going to type npm I and then bcrypt. That's bcrypt. And we'll go ahead and install this package. It shouldn't take long. And when it's complete, we'll check our package.json file to ensure that it has been added to our project. And it looks like we're about ready to do that now. So let's see. We've got it installed. Let's scroll down here and I'll choose package.json. And yes, bcrypt has been added to our package.json file. So we'll go ahead and close that out. Now we can require bcrypt at the top of our file with our other requirements. So set that equal to require and pull in bcrypt. Okay, now that we've done that, let's go ahead and define our handler for the new user information that we'll receive at this register route. So I'm going to call this handle new user, and this is going to receive a request and a response. Now what I forgot to do was make this an async function, which we need to do. We can use async await with bcrypt, and we might need it somewhere else too. Now, when we first pull this information in, the request is going to have a user and a password. So let's destructure that from the request body. So we'll get the user and the password. Set this equal to the request.body. And now we can say if there's no user or there's no password, we'll go ahead and return right here with a response The status will be 400, which stands for bad request. That's an HTTP status code. And then JSON will go ahead and send a message down, and we'll say message, and now we'll say username and password are required. And I'm noticing that we're not wrapping lines, so I'm going to press Alt-Z in Windows. That's what goes ahead and tells Visual Studio Code to wrap the lines of code. It may be different if you're on Mac or Linux. Okay, so we're sending that response if we did not receive the user or password. But now at this point, we'll know we have received both the user and password. And this is where we would, let me go ahead and put a comment here, check for duplicate usernames in the database. And now since we're connecting to our JSON file to use as our database just as a simulation for this tutorial, we can go ahead and check for a duplicate in that JSON by doing this. Let's go ahead and define duplicate, and then we'll set that equal to usersdb dot users, which will pull in the users. Then we can use find, and now out of each user, let's go ahead and call this person so it just doesn't get confusing by too many users or using the word user over and over. This will be person, and then we're seeing if the person dot username from our user database is equal to the user that has been submitted, the username that's been submitted by the user. And therefore, we can see if we get a result as duplicate. And then we can say, if we have a duplicate, then we want to return a response. It's response.send status, and it's 409. And that is a conflict, is what that HTTP status code stands for. But if not, we're going to start a try catch now. So here's our try, and of course we have a catch afterwards where we would catch an error. And now let's go ahead and fill out that error block first. So if we get an error here, we're going to send a response with a status of 500, which would be a server error. We'll have JSON, and let's go ahead and send a message here as well. And we can just pass in the error dot message that is received. Okay, but in our try block now, we need to go ahead and create our new user, and of course also use bcrypt to hash the password. Okay, I'll put a comment right here that we're going to encrypt the password with the next line, and this is where we'll use bcrypt. So let's define our hashed password, and we'll set that equal to await, and then use bcrypt. And now, oops, I'm sorry, we don't want compare, we want hash. And inside of that, we pass in the password that we've received from the user. We're going to hash it. And here we determine the salt rounds. So it not only hashes the password, but it adds a salt to it. And that really helps protect the password if your database is somehow compromised, because at that point, if a hacker were able to figure out the hash, they could crack all of the passwords in the database. But adding the individual salts makes that much more difficult and unique for each one. So here we'll pass in 10 salt rounds, which is essentially the default or the standard there. And that will add the salt and the hash all at once. And bcrypt does a great job of storing those together at the same time. So that's really all we have to do there. Now that we've got the hashed password, we're going to go ahead and store, I'll put store the new user. And this, remember, is just going to our simulated user table that we're using in the JSON. So here I'm going to say new user and define the new user object first. We'll set this equal to username. We'll pass in the user, and then we'll have a password that we're going to store. And this will be our hashed password that we've created. Now let's set the new data with usersdb.setUsers, and here we'll pass in all of the data that we have. So we're working with immutable data. Instead of adding to the existing array, we're going to create a brand new array and then set all of that in the database. Very similar to using state in React here. So this will be ... users db.users, and then we'll also add the new user, all in this new array that we are setting as the new users, or the new users data. Okay, now that we've set that, let's go ahead and write it to our JSON file, which is our database in this simulation. So we'll have fs promises.write file. And now I'm going to break this out into separate lines just so we can see everything better. I'll go ahead and close our terminal window too. So now on the first line, I'm going to use path.join, and we're going to pull in the directory name. And after that, we need to go up out of the controllers directory. And then we need to go down into the model directory. And then we need to go ahead and write our users.json file. So this will overwrite any existing file there. And once we've done that, we need to specify the data we're sending. And this will say json.stringify, and we're going to pass in our usersdb.users. Okay, from there, let's just log to the console so we can see all of the users, or at least the one user that we add. But we'll log all in case we go ahead and test it more than once and add more than one user. We'll log those to the console, and then we need to send a status. And that status is 201 to say the new user was created. And let's go ahead and send some JSON again with a success. You could put message here or whatever you want, but we'll put new user, and then we'll pass in the user so we get the username, and we'll say created. And I needed to make this a template literal. Instead of using single quotes, we need backticks, and that way we can pass the user straight into the string that we're sending back. So we've created the new user, and there's the response. And that's basically it, except at the very bottom now we need to use module.exports, and let's go ahead and put this in an object so we can pull in the full name of the controller when we import it, just like we have previously done with the employees controller. And there we're finished with the register controller. So now let's go to the routes folder, and we'll need to create a new route for this. Let's just call this register.js. And now at the top of register.js, we need to pull in Express again. And this will be equal to require Express. And then we need to define our router. So we'll set the router equal to express.router. And then we'll need to go ahead and pull in the controller. So let's call this register controller. And we'll set it equal to require. And then we need come up out of the routes folder, and then we'll go into the controllers folder, and from there we'll choose the register controller. Okay, now that we've got that, let's define our router, or our route that we're looking for here, and it's a post, and this will come in at the slash, just the root, and then we'll pull in our register controller dot handle new user. And after that, we can use module exports on it. I could spell module. We'll set this equal to router as we do with our routes. And now finally, in the server.js at the very bottom of our file tree, we want to go ahead and add this route with the other routes. So I'll just copy this down to start off. And we have this slash, and this will be app use, and now we're going to use the register route, and we're going to require routes/register, and we can save that. I'm going to collapse this open editor so we can see all the file tree at once. And if you remember, in our package JSON, we have NodeMon installed as a dev dependency, and that will help us go ahead and start this dev server. So I'm going to press Control backtick once again to launch a new terminal window. Again, you can do that from the terminal menu as well. And now I'm going to type npm run dev to launch our server. And we should get a message here saying what port it's running on. And it looks like we've got an error. Let's see where the error is. Cannot find module model user JSON. Oh, and that's because I named it users JSON. So we didn't import that correctly. Let's go back to our register controller and change that to users.json. And we'll save. And now we should see NodeMon restart, and we're running on port 3500. Okay, now we can check our route, and I'm going to use an extension called Thunder Client to do that. And you see Thunder Client up here in the top left. If you don't have Thunder Client installed, you can do that, or you can use something else like the app Postman would be a good one that is normally used to check API routes with. But you can find Thunder Client in VS Code extensions, and I've found it's pretty good to check API routes with in a dev environment. So here it is on the left. I've got the circle with the lightning bolt, and we can go ahead and create a new request, and you can also save collections. And I've got a collection here already with the request that I want to make. So I'll look at this first one, and you can see it's a post request, and it's going to http://localhost port 3500, and this goes to auth. I don't want the auth. We created the register one. Let me find that. There's the register one. Okay. Now if I click on Thunder Client or the file tree or anything else, it will hide this, and I've noticed that Thunder Client has a much better appearance when we hide that bar over here. So now we have the request on the left, we'll get the response on the right, and I can still see the Node.js console down here at the bottom. So with the register route in here, and it's a post route, I need to check the body and make sure I'm sending something. I'm going to send user walt3. I believe I'll just create walt1 this time around. And here's a password. And of course it's unencrypted right now, but we'll see what we get in the Node.js console, because remember, we're going to log to the console the users, and that should also include the password if I remember correctly. And of course we'll get the response over here that the client would get. So I'll click send, and on the right we've got success, new user walt1 created. Now here at the bottom it's got just a little more information, so we need to pull this up so we can see more. And there you see our users JSON, and it created walt1, and here is the encrypted password that is both hashed and salted that bcrypt helped us create from the password that we passed in. So now let's go ahead and pull this down, and let's create one more user. Let's just create walt2, and we'll send this. Success, new user walt2 created. And now let's once again look at the Node console, and you can see now both users were logged to the console here in Node, and they have different passwords as well that are encrypted. And of course we could break all that down, but I'll let you look at the link to bcrypt, and I've got another good article on that as well. I'll link to both of those in the description below, so make sure you do that. Okay, we have tested and handled the registration, but of course now we need to go ahead and handle the authorization as well. I'm going to close the terminal again, and I'm going to copy the import of the users DB with users in set users, and I'll go ahead and create an auth controller now in the controllers directory. So we'll call this auth controller.js. And now the first thing I'll do is paste in the users DB where we import in our users JSON that simulates our users database table. And we're also going to need bcrypt again. So let's set this equal to require and bcrypt. And now we can begin constructing our function. Let's call this handle login. And let's set it equal to an async function that has a request and a response. Now inside the function, we'll start out just like we did inside the register controller, where we expect to get a user and a password parameter both sent to us. And if we don't, we'll send back that 400 HTTP status code that says it is a bad request. So we can paste those right in. I'll press Alt-Z again so the code wraps. So they start out the same way, but after that there are definitely some differences. And what we need to do now is try to find the user that's sent in. Before we even concern ourselves with the password, let's just see if the username exists. So I'm going to call this found user. and set it equal to users.db.users.find, and then we'll look at each person in the users table, and we'll say person.username equal to user. And find works this way until it actually finds somebody. And then if it finds somebody, it will return that value. And if not, of course, it will be false or undefined at that point. So now we could log this and take a look, but let's just say if we do not find a user, if we do not have a found user, we'll go ahead and return the response.send status, and we're going to send a 401, which means unauthorized. And I could put a link to MDN that lists all of the HTTP status codes in the description below as well, and I think I will do that. So there, if we do not find the user, we know, hey, that's it. There's no need to look any further. This is unauthorized, and so it won't work. But now if we do find a user, we need to go ahead and, let me put a note here, just say evaluate. Now if I could spell evaluate, there we go, evaluate password. And we'll use bcrypt to do that. So let's say match is what we're going to define, and we can just say await bcrypt.compare, and let's pass in the password that we receive with the request, and we're going to compare it to the user that we've found and the password that exists for that user. And now if we do have a match, if the passwords match, we can reply with the JSON, and once again we could send a success message, and we'll just say, oh, backticks again, and we'll say user and pass in the user value, and from there we'll say is logged in. But we could also have an else there, and if we do not have a match at this point, then we'll say response send status. And once again, this will be a 401 unauthorized. And we can save that, and we're essentially finished with the function, except for adding the module.exports here once again. And we'll put it in an object again, and we'll say handle login. But the other note that I want to add to this, and we're not doing it in this tutorial, but we will in the next, is this is where we would create a JWT to send to use with the other routes that we want protected in our API. So we'd actually create and send a couple of JWTs, which would be a normal token and then the refresh token. So let's put create JWTs. That would be right here in this spot. And we'll just leave this note here for the next tutorial. But now we've created our handle login in our auth controller. So we once again need to create, here we go, scroll in the tree. We need to create a route for auth. So we'll just put auth.js right here, and we can copy most everything we have in the register and just change this over in auth. So at the top we need express and router just the same, but instead of register, this is the auth controller. We can select all of those with Control D and change them to auth. And after that, instead of handle new user, it is handle login that we want from the auth controller, and save. And our auth route is complete. Now let's go back to the server once again, and let's add the auth route as well. So let's just copy down. I press Shift Alt and the down arrow to copy a line down in Windows. And I'm going to put in the auth route here. I'll press Control D to select both, and just put auth, and save that as well. With that complete, let's go back to Thunder Client, and we'll look at our auth collection. There it is. And let's see if we can pull up the correct route. This is the auth route. That's great. So I'll hide the rest, and we get a better look here. I want to see that terminal again, so I'm going to press Control and backtick to pull up the Node terminal. And here we are on port 3500. So we're sending another post. This is going to localhost port 3500 and the auth route right here. So let's look at what we're sending in the body. And we want to log in with Walt1 and the password that we had previously submitted as well. So we'll see the client, what the client receives here on the right, and we'll see if anything is logged. I can't remember if we logged anything to the console this time around. Let's go ahead and send this. Well, we at least logged what route we hit here in the console, but now this says user Walt1 is logged in. Let's go ahead and try to log in with the user we don't have, like Walt3. And now we get our 401 unauthorized, which is exactly what we wanted. And I'm just thinking now, earlier, we didn't send something to register that already existed. So let's try to register a name that we've already registered. We registered Walt2 last time. This is going to the register route. So now let's try to register. And we got a 409 conflict. That's exactly what we expected there as well. So it appears our routes are working correctly and everything seems good. So this is handling authorization with username and a password on the back end. And we have simulated a database by using users.json. But in the future, we could connect this to MongoDB, MySQL, or some type of database technology. And you really wouldn't use just a JSON file in production, or at least I wouldn't recommend it. But we will come back in the next tutorial and learn how to protect routes with JSON web tokens. Give this video a like if it helped you get started with the Express framework for Node.js. And thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.